47. The number tasted like copper and cordite when the grenade landed 3 meters from my foxhole and I watched the fuse spark down to nothing. Private Emerson Dove left. Corporal Huang threw himself flat. I just stood there, counting the half seconds between the spark and the blast, thinking, this one, finally. The concussion wave picked me up like a child's toy and threw me against the trench wall. Shrapnel tore through my flak armor in 6 places. I felt each piece enter my body with surgical precision, 1 in the shoulder, 2 in the ribs, 1 through my hip, 1 lodged somewhere in the meat of my thigh, and the last one buried itself in my neck, just left of the jugular. I lay there in the mud of Helion 4, watching blood pump out of me in rhythmic spurts, listening to my heart slow down, feeling that familiar cold creeping up from my fingers and toes. Then I felt the other thing, that crawling sensation, that wrongness. The bleeding stopped, not because I was dying, because my body had decided once again that I wasn't allowed to. Emerson's leg was gone below the knee. Huang's chest was a crater. I was sitting up 15 minutes later, picking shrapnel out of closing wounds with my combat knife when the medics finally reached our position. Emperor's mercy, one of them whispered, making the sign of the Aquila. Sergeant Webb, you should be dead, I know. That was 3 months ago, my 47th battle, my 47th survival. They'd stopped calling it luck around my 35th. I joined the 445th Kelleran Rifles when I was 17 years old. Marcus Webb, conscription number 7782 Gamma 19, pulled from a hab block in the lower reaches of Hive Secundus with nothing but the clothes on my back and a vague understanding that the god Emperor required my service. I was unremarkable in every way, middling scores on the aptitude tests, average performance in basic training, no particular talent for violence or survival. I cried during my first live fire exercise. I vomited the first time I saw a corpse. They shipped us to Carthax Prime for our first deployment. Orc raiders had been hitting the Agri settlements for months, and the planetary defense forces needed reinforcement. Simple assignment, they told us. Clean-up duty. Minimal casualties expected. The Orcs hit our column on the 3rd day. 1,700 guardsmen entered that canyon. 93 walked out. I should not have been among them. I remember the moment clearly, a chopper blade, crude and rust-pitted, descending toward my skull. I remember seeing my death in that arc of corroded metal. I remember the impact, and then I remember waking up in a field hospital with a headache and a scar that ran from my hairline to my jaw. The chirurgeon who examined me called it a miracle. The priest who visited our ward called it the Emperor's blessing. My squadmates, those few who survived, stopped looking me in the eye. That was battle number 1. I learned something in the 17 years that followed. Miracles aren't meant to be repeated. The 445th was folded into the 89th Kelleran, combined after Carthax Prime. Then the 89th was decimated on Forge World Theta-7, and the survivors merged with the Castellan Rifles. Then the Castellan Rifles were wiped out at Hive Mortuus, and those of us still breathing became part of the 12th Expeditionary. Regiment after regiment, name after name, banner after banner. I was the common thread, the constant, the man who wouldn't die. By my 20th battle, the officers had started requesting me specifically. By my 30th, they'd stopped asking and simply attached me to whatever unit was facing the worst odds. By my 40th, there were whispers that followed me through every barracks and staging area, whispers that named me Unlucky Charm, Death's Jester, the Imperium's Joke. Men and women assigned to my squad developed a particular look in their eyes. Not fear exactly, something worse, resignation. They knew even, before the first shot was fired, that they would die and I would not. They knew they were standing beside a hole in the fabric of natural law. Private Yates told me once, during a night march on Chthonus the 7th, that being near me felt like standing beside an open grave. "It's not that you're cursed," she said, her voice barely audible above the crunch of our boots on the volcanic ash. "It's that you're a reminder. Every time I look at you, I remember that the universe doesn't give a damn about fairness. You should have died 100 times. You didn't. Some of us do everything right and catch a stray round in the first 5 minutes." She caught that stray round 3 days later, during a rearguard action against tyrannid bioforms. I held her while she bled out, telling her the same lies I'd told dozens of others, that it would be quick, that she'd see the Emperor's light, that her sacrifice mattered. I believed none of it. When her breathing stopped, I set her body down and kept fighting. The bioforms tore me open twice before the extraction arrived, once across the belly, once through the forearm. Both wounds sealed themselves before I reached the Medicae bay. The chirurgeons didn't even ask questions anymore. They just noted my name on the survival manifest and moved on to patients they could actually help. 47 battles. I stopped counting individual wounds around the 200th. I stopped counting dead friends around the same time. The arithmetic of survival in the Imperial Guard is brutal and simple. You multiply deployment length by enemy threat level, divide by supply line reliability, and the number you get tells you roughly how many of your companions will be corpses by extraction day. It's cold mathematics. It's the only mathematics that matters. My personal equation broke those rules. 0 deaths across 47 battles, statistically impossible, theologically complicated. Father Dominguez started watching me after Helion 4th. I noticed him first in the mess hall 3 days after the grenade incident. A thin man in black robes with the rosarius of the ecclesiarchy hanging against his chest. He wasn't eating, wasn't reading, just watching me with the patient intensity of a predator, waiting for the exact right moment to strike. I'd seen priests before, of course. The guard attracts them like carrion draws flies. They perform last rites, lead morning prayers, execute the occasional suspected heretic. They're furniture in the regiment, always present, rarely consequential. Dominguez was different. He started showing up wherever I went. Morning calisthenics, weapons maintenance, the latrine block at 0300 when I couldn't sleep. Always watching, always noting something in a small leather journal he kept chained to his belt. I confronted him on the 4th day. "You have questions, Father?" He didn't flinch. Most priests I'd met were soft men, clinging to faith because they couldn't handle the alternative. Dominguez had the eyes of someone who'd looked into the alternative and came back wanting more. "Sergeant Webb," he said, his voice like sand scraping stone. 17 years of service, 47 combat engagements, 4 regimental dissolutions, confirmed wounds exceeding 200 in number, no permanent disability, no lasting injury, no death. You've done your research. The Administratum keeps excellent records." He tilted his head, studying me the way a Scholem student might examine a particularly interesting insect. "You are an anomaly, Sergeant, a statistical impossibility. I've been called worse, I have no doubt." He stepped closer, and I noticed the scars on his hands for the first time. Burn scars, the kind you get from holding something hot for far too long. "I'm not here to accuse you of heresy, if that's your concern. The Ordo Hereticus has examined your file 3 times already. You've been cleared each time." That was news to me. I'd always assumed my survival went unnoticed by the higher authorities. Just another clerical curiosity lost in the vast bureaucracy of the Imperium.
"Then what do you want? I want to understand."
He opened his journal, showing me pages filled with cramped handwriting and complex diagrams. "You're not the only one, Sergeant. There are others like you, scattered across the galaxy, serving in different regiments, fighting different wars. Men and women who cannot die." The words hit me harder than any grenade. "Others? 17 confirmed cases over the past 3 centuries. That's only in the Imperial Guard. The records from the Navy, the Mechanicus, and the Ecclesiarchy itself suggest many more." He flipped to a page marked with a black ribbon. "Private Elena Vance, 77th Mordian Iron Guard. 42 engagements, no deaths. She was eventually deployed to a penal legion as punishment for a fabricated offense. She survived that too. 8 years in units with a 98% mortality rate. They eventually stopped deploying her entirely. What happened to her? Unknown. Her records simply stop. No death certificate, no transfer orders, she vanished." Another page. "Lieutenant Commander Jacob Reese, Battle Fleet Obscurus. His ship was destroyed 4 times over his career. He was recovered from the wreckage each time. After the 4th destruction, he was reassigned to administrative duties. 3 years later, he requested a transfer back to active void combat. His request was denied. 6 months after that, his hab unit was found empty. No sign of struggle, no sign of departure, gone. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear. I'd stopped feeling true fear somewhere around my 25th battle. Something else. Recognition. You're telling me the Imperium makes us disappear. I'm telling you the Imperium doesn't know what to do with you. Dominguez closed the journal. You're an anomaly, Sergeant Webb. Anomalies are dangerous. They suggest that the universe operates according to rules the ecclesiarchy hasn't sanctioned. They imply that the Emperor's protection might be selective, arbitrary, or, worst of all, mechanical rather than divine. So why are you here? Why watch me? His smile was the least comforting expression I'd ever seen on a human face. Because I believe you're close to finding out the truth, and I want to be there when you do. The 12th Expeditionary shipped out for Cadian space 2 weeks later. The fall of Cadia had happened years before. I'd been fighting on the other side of the segmentum when the Eye of Terror split open and poured damnation across half the galaxy. The aftermath was still being measured in bodies and burned worlds. Cadian space was a graveyard now, haunted by the things that had crawled through the Great Rift and the desperate survivors still trying to hold what little remained. Our mission was simple: reinforce a mining installation on Castellax Minor, extract whatever resources were salvageable, and establish a forward operating base for future reclamation efforts. Simple mission, minimal combat expected. I'd heard that before. The transport shuddered through the rift's edge, and I felt something watching us from the other side of reality. Not seeing, the warp doesn't have eyes. Tasting, testing, pressing against the hull like a tongue probing a wound. Father Dominguez sat across from me in the troop bay, his journal open on his knee. He'd been writing constantly since we'd left Helion 4, pages and pages of notes, diagrams, questions without answers. I'd stopped trying to read over his shoulder after he caught me the first time and simply smiled that unsettling smile of his. You feel it, don't you? He asked, not looking up from his writing. The warp? Everyone feels it, not the warp. He finally met my eyes. The attention. Something in there knows what you are. Something is interested. I didn't answer. The landing on Castellax Minor was clean. No enemy contact, no complications. The mining installation was a sprawling complex of prefab structures and half-buried machinery, abandoned when the rift opened and not touched since. Our orders were to secure the perimeter, assess the damage and report back on salvage potential. 40 guardsmen, standard reconnaissance force. I was assigned as squad leader for Fire Team Gamma, 8 soldiers tasked with clearing the eastern residential sector. I knew 4 of them would be dead by the end of the week. I didn't know which 4, but the mathematics never lied. We swept the hab blocks one by one, finding nothing but dust, abandoned personal effects, and the occasional skeleton. The miners had been evacuated before the worst of the fighting reached this sector, most of them anyway. A few had stayed behind, either by choice or circumstance. Their bones told stories I chose not to read too closely. Private Torres found the door on our second day. It was hidden behind a collapsed wall in Hab Block 7. A sealed blast door of a design I didn't recognize, marked with symbols that made my eyes ache when I tried to focus on them. Not Imperial iconography. Not Chaos markings either, as far as I could tell. Something older. Something that predated both. Sarge? Torres was young, maybe 19. He'd been assigned to my squad 3 months ago and hadn't yet developed the fatalistic resignation that usually settled into my soldiers by the second week. What is this? I don't know. Should we report it? I should have said yes. Standard protocol demanded immediate notification of any unexplained structures or artifacts. The Guard had entire departments dedicated to cataloging and containing such things. We were simple soldiers. Our job was to observe and report, not investigate, but something held me in place. Something kept my hand off the Vox. The door was calling to me. Not literally. There was no sound, no voice. Just a pull deep in my chest, where the wounds always healed fastest. Set a perimeter, I heard myself say. I'm going in, alone. Sarge, regulations. I said set a perimeter, private. Torres hesitated, then nodded. He'd seen enough in 3 months to know that questioning my orders rarely accomplished anything. I was going to survive whatever was on the other side of that door. His job was to make sure the rest of the squad survived long enough to file the paperwork. The door opened at my touch. No locks, no security measures, just smooth metal swinging inward on silent hinges, revealing a corridor that descended into darkness. The air inside was cold, not void cold or cryo cold, a different cold, the kind you feel in old places, spaces that have been waiting for a very long time. I activated my lumen and started walking. The corridor went down for what felt like kilometers, though my chronometer insisted I'd only been walking for 12 minutes. The walls were lined with more of those symbols, spiraling patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I kept my eyes forward and my finger on my lasgun's trigger. The corridor opened into a chamber. I've seen a lot of things in 17 years of service. Orc war camps built from human bones, tyrannid digestion pools filled with dissolving colonists, chaos shrines decorated with the faces of the devout. I thought I'd developed a tolerance for the Imperium's horrors. This was different. The chamber was circular, perhaps 50 meters across. The walls were covered in names, not carved, not written, grown. The names emerged from the stone itself like scar tissue, like the material had healed around each letter and number, embedding them permanently into the structure of the room. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands. I found Elena Vance's name on the eastern wall, surrounded by dates and numbers I couldn't interpret. Jacob Reese was nearby, his name older, the letters more faded. And there, in a column that stretched from floor to ceiling, I found the others Father Dominguez had mentioned. 17 names, 17. Impossible survivors, all recorded in this forgotten place beneath a abandoned mining colony. My name wasn't there, not yet, but there was space for it. A blank spot on the southern wall, waiting. You found it. I spun, lasgun raised. Father Dominguez stood at the chamber's entrance, his robes stained with the dust of the corridors above. His journal was nowhere in sight. You knew this was here, I suspected. He walked into the chamber, running his fingers across the names as he passed them. The records I found were fragmentary, references to a registry, a place where the Imperium catalogued its anomalies before deciding what to do with them. I thought it was a myth. What is this place? A record? A monument? He stopped beside Elena Vance's name, tracing the letters with something that might have been reverence and a prison. I lowered my lasgun slightly. Not because I trusted him, I didn't trust anyone anymore, but because shooting him wouldn't change what I was seeing. Explain. The Imperium discovered your condition centuries ago. Not just you, the phenomenon. People who cannot die, no matter what wounds they sustain. The ecclesiarchy called it a blessing at first, the emperor's chosen, marked for eternal service. But then they started studying you. He turned to face me, and in the lumen light, I saw that his eyes had changed. The pupils were too large, too dark, like holes punched through to somewhere else. They found the truth, Sergeant Webb. The reason you survive isn't divine, it isn't even natural. You're not blessed, you're repurposed. Repurposed for what? War. Endless war. The Imperium needs soldiers who won't stop fighting, won't stop dying, so they made you. Not genetically, that's too unreliable, too easy to trace. They made you spiritually, a small modification to the soul, a minor adjustment to the compact between flesh and oblivion. I felt the cold spreading through my chest again, but this time it wasn't the approach of death. It was recognition. The sensation I'd been feeling for 17 years, that wrongness when my wounds healed, that crawling certainty that something was stitching me back together, finally had a name. The Administratum, among others. Dominguez smiled and I saw the scars on his hands in a new light. I was part of the project once, a junior researcher, before my conscience became inconvenient. They burned the doubt out of me, or they tried to. Some burns don't heal, even for men like us. He pulled back his sleeve, revealing flesh that rippled with old wounds, wounds that had closed but never fully scarred, still pink and raw after what must have been decades. You're one of us. I was the first successful conversion, the prototype. His voice was steady, emotionless. They learned so much from my suffering, refined the process, made it cleaner. By the time they got to you, it barely hurt at all. I didn't remember any modification. No surgery, no ritual, no moment of change. I'd joined the Guard as an ordinary conscript, and somewhere between Hive Secundus and my first deployment, I'd become something else entirely. When? Basic training, the water supply. A simple compound that binds to the soul during moments of extreme stress. Your first near-death experience activated it. Every near-death experience since has reinforced it. You're not immortal, Sergeant Webb. You're locked. The universe is physically incapable of letting you die until the Imperium decides to release you. And what happens then? Dominguez's smile faded. Then you experience every death you've avoided, simultaneously. All the wounds that should have killed you. All the moments your body should have surrendered. They come back. I thought about the grenade on Helion 4, the chopper on Carthax Prime, the 100 other times I'd felt death's approach and been dragged back from the threshold, all of them, at once. The others, I said, the names on this wall. That's what happened to them. Some, the ones who learned too much, asked too many questions, threatened to reveal the project to the wrong people. The Administratum brought them here and released them. Their deaths took hours. He reached into his robes and produced a small device, a brass cylinder covered in seals and sigils I didn't recognize. This is the key, the release mechanism. One for each of us, kept in facilities like this across the galaxy. Find yours and destroy it, and you stay locked forever. Find it and activate it. I die. You become mortal again. The next wound that would have killed you actually will. Some have chosen that path. They considered it mercy. I stared at the device in his hand. Is that yours? It was. I destroyed it 312 years ago. He tucked it back into his robes. I've been looking for an alternative ever since. A way to end this that doesn't involve experiencing 3 centuries of accumulated death. Have you found one? No. He turned toward the names on the wall, his shoulders slumping with a weariness I recognized. But I've found something else. A pattern. The Imperium doesn't just create us randomly. They select candidates based on specific criteria: psychological profile, neural plasticity, faith index. They're building something. An army of soldiers who cannot die, scattered across every war zone in the galaxy. Building for what? I don't know yet. But the rate of conversion has been increasing. Whatever they're planning, it's approaching. He glanced back at me. That's why I've been following you, Sergeant Webb. Your file suggests you're close to figuring out the truth, close to breaking the programming that keeps us compliant. I wanted to see if you could do what I couldn't, which is fight back. I should have felt something: anger at the manipulation, horror at the revelation, fear of the accumulated deaths waiting inside my flesh. Instead, I felt only the familiar numbness that had been my companion for years. There's a battle coming, I said. The Greenskins have been massing in the northern sectors. Command expects contact within 48 hours. I know, 48. That will be number 48. Dominguez studied me with those 2 dark eyes. You're still counting. I never stopped. I looked at the blank space on the wall where my name would eventually go. I've been counting my whole life. Battles, wounds, dead friends. I thought if I kept track, it might start making sense. Maybe there was a number that would explain everything. A total that would justify the cost. Is there? No. I raised my lasgun and shot the wall. The last bolt punched through stone and symbol alike, obliterating the space where my name was meant to be written. Smoke rose from the impact point. That won't change anything, Dominguez said quietly. They'll just find another wall, probably. I fired again and again, burning my way through names I didn't recognize, destroying records that had stood for centuries, but I'm not counting for them anymore. I'm not following their mathematics. The battle on Castellax Minor began 6 hours ahead of schedule. Orc ships had translated in-system during the night, evading our detection arrays through a combination of luck and the Rift's interference with our sensors. By dawn, green-skinned warriors were pouring across the mining installation's perimeter, and our 40 guardsmen were fighting a desperate retreat toward the extraction point. I led Fire Team Gamma through the eastern sectors, covering the withdrawal of our wounded. Private Torres took a slug round through the shoulder 15 minutes into the engagement. Corporal Vasquez lost her leg to a stick bomb 10 minutes after that. 3 of my 8 soldiers were dead before we reached the primary defensive line. 48. Father Dominguez fought beside me, his lasgun firing with mechanical precision, despite his claimed 3 centuries of existence. Whatever modifications the Administratum had made to our souls, they hadn't diminished our capacity for violence. "The extraction shuttle is inbound," he shouted over the roar of combat. 7 minutes, we won't last 7 minutes. The orcs were everywhere. Scores of them, maybe hundreds, their crude weapons tearing through our ranks with brutal efficiency. The mathematics said we were already dead. A 40-person garrison against a full orc warband was no contest at all. I watched Private Torres die 3 meters in front of me, his young face disappearing beneath a chopper blade. I watched Corporal Chen vanish into a mob of greenskins, his screams cut short by the wet sound of impact. I watched guardsmen I'd served with for months reduced to stains on the ferrocrete, and I felt the wounds beginning. A slugger round punched through my flak armor and buried itself in my gut. The familiar coldness began, followed by the crawling sensation of flesh knitting closed. No. The word echoed through my mind, louder than the gunfire, sharper than the pain. For 17 years I'd let the modifications do their work. I'd allowed the universe to stitch me back together, over and over, compliant and grateful for a gift I'd never asked for. Not anymore. I focused on the wound. Really focused for the first time since Carthax Prime. I felt the process, the impossible healing, the denial of natural law, and I pushed against it. The wound stayed open, blood poured down my side, hot and real and mine. The pain was extraordinary, different from the muted sensations I'd grown accustomed to. This was actual damage, actual mortality. Webb. Dominguez grabbed my shoulder. "What are you doing? Fighting back?" I raised my lasgun with trembling hands and fired into the orc line. 1 shot, 2. Each trigger pull sent agony radiating through my torso, but the wound wasn't healing. I was dying, actually dying, and I could feel something else. The accumulated deaths Dominguez had described, all those moments my body should have surrendered. They were stirring inside me, not releasing, not yet, but pressing against the barrier, testing the cracks I'd created. The extraction shuttle screamed overhead. Heavy bolter fire tore into the orc ranks, scattering them long enough for the survivors to begin boarding. "Move!" someone shouted. Dominguez, maybe, or one of the few guardsmen still standing. I didn't move. I stood in the middle of the killing field, bleeding freely for the first time in 17 years, watching the orcs regroup. One of them, a massive knob with cybernetic implants fused to its skull, locked eyes with me across the corpse-strewn ground. It grinned, revealing teeth like broken tombstones, and charged. The chopper descended. I didn't dodge, didn't raise my weapon, just stood there, feeling the wind of its passage, the heat of the knob's breath, the absolute certainty of impact. The blade stopped 3 centimeters from my skull. Time hadn't frozen, the orc hadn't hesitated, something else had intervened, the same something that had been keeping me alive all these years, asserting itself one final time against my rebellion. But the intervention was weaker now, uncertain. The modifications weren't designed for resistance, they assumed compliance. When I pushed against them, they pushed back, but not as hard as before. The chopper resumed its descent. I threw myself backward, and the blade carved a furrow across my chest instead of splitting my head. Deep wound, potentially fatal. The wound stayed open. I hit the ground hard, lasgun skittering away across the ferrocrete. The knob loomed over me, raising its chopper for a finishing stroke. A bolt round took its head off. Dominguez stood above me, a bolter I didn't recognize clenched in his scarred hands. "The shuttle, you fool. Now." I let him drag me aboard. The wound in my chest continued bleeding, soaking through my uniform, dripping onto the deck plates. None of the surviving guardsmen looked surprised. They'd probably expected me to die eventually. Everyone else did. "You broke it," Dominguez said as the shuttle climbed away from the carnage below. "The lock. You actually broke it, not completely." I could still feel the modification working slower than before, struggling against my resistance. But enough. What now? I looked at the blood on my hands. Real blood. Mortal blood. For the first time in 17 years, my body was obeying the laws of biology instead of defying them. The shuttle shuddered as we breached atmosphere. Behind us, Castellax Minor burned. Now I find my key, I said, the release mechanism, the one they made for me. And then, I thought about the names on that wall, about Elena Vance and Jacob Reese, and all the others who had disappeared when they learned too much. I thought about the accumulated deaths waiting inside my flesh, 48 battles worth of wounds that wanted to become real. Then I decide. Dominguez nodded slowly. There's a facility on Thracian 4, administrative hub for this sector. The keys are stored in the sublevels. How do you know? Because I've spent 300 years looking for a way to die, Sergeant Webb. His smile was sad and strange and somehow hopeful. I know where all the locks are kept. The shuttle carried us away from the 48th battle of my career. Behind us, the fires of Castellax Minor painted the void. Ahead, Thracian 4 waited. I stopped counting. For 17 years, numbers had been my anchor. Battles survived, wounds accumulated, dead friends catalogued. I'd believed that if I kept accurate records, the universe might eventually balance its books, might explain why I lived while better soldiers died, why my flesh refused to surrender when their bodies simply stopped. There was no explanation. There was only the Administratum's cold arithmetic, adding immortal soldiers to its eternal ledgers, subtracting them when they became inconvenient. The transit to Thracian 4 took 6 days. Dominguez spent most of it in the cargo hold, disassembling and reassembling the bolter he'd acquired from Emperor knows where. The surviving guardsmen, 9 of us from the original 40, kept their distance from both of us. They'd seen me take wounds that should have killed me. They'd seen those wounds fail to heal. They didn't know what to call me anymore. Neither did I. On the 4th day, Corporal Martinez approached my cot in the medical bay. She was young for her rank, 23, maybe 24, with the hollow eyes of someone who'd seen too much too quickly. She'd been with Fire Team Beta during the extraction, lost her entire squad except for one private whose name I hadn't learned. "Sarge," she said, "the priest. He told us what you are." "Did he?" "He said you were made, modified. Said the Imperium turned you into something that couldn't die." She sat on the cot across from mine, her hands clasped tight between her knees. "Is it true? Does it matter? I lost 8 friends on that rock, good soldiers, the kind who followed orders and kept the faith and did everything right." Her voice cracked. "I want to know if there's a reason you lived and they didn't." I could have lied, could have given her the standard ecclesiarchy answer about the Emperor's mysterious will, the unfathomable wisdom of divine selection. It would have been kinder. "There's a reason," I said. "It's just not a good one." She waited. "The Administratum selects candidates based on psychological profile and neural plasticity. They modify us during basic training, through the water supply, through compounds that bind to the soul during moments of extreme stress. We can't die because the universe has been programmed to prevent it. It's not a blessing, it's a manufacturing process. That's heresy." "Probably," I shrugged, wincing as the motion pulled at the wound in my chest. "But it's also true." Martinez stared at me for a long moment. I watched the information settle into her face, the anger first, then the grief. Then something harder and colder that I recognized too well. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to find the thing that keeps me locked, and I'm going to destroy it or activate it. Haven't decided which yet." "What's the difference?" "One lets me stay alive forever, the other lets me die properly, and you're not sure which one you want?" I thought about the question, really thought about it, for the first time since Dominguez had explained the truth beneath Castellax Minor. "I've been surviving for 17 years, I said finally. 48 battles, hundreds of wounds, thousands of dead friends. I never chose any of it, never had the option to say no." I met her eyes. "I want the choice. Whatever I decide, I want it to be mine." Martinez nodded slowly. "The priest says there are more of you, other soldiers who can't die." 17 confirmed, probably more. "He says the Imperium is building something, an army, he thinks so." "What for?" "I don't know. I gestured at the bandage wrapped around my torso, already spotted with fresh blood. But I know this. Whatever they're planning, they need soldiers who won't question orders. Soldiers who've accepted their condition as a blessing instead of a chain. The modifications work best when we're compliant. When we believe we're chosen instead of manufactured, you're not compliant anymore. No. I smiled, and even I could tell it wasn't a pleasant expression. I'm not. Thracian 4 was a grey world. Grey sky, grey buildings, grey uniforms on the bureaucrats who processed the millions of documents that kept the Imperium functioning. It wasn't a hub of power, not like a hive world or forge world, but it was a center of information, a nexus where records were stored, cross-referenced, and occasionally destroyed. The facility Dominguez had described was located beneath the capital's administrative sanctum, a building that covered 3 square kilometers and employed over 400,000 clerks, scribes, and data servitors. Security was minimal because security was unnecessary. Who would attack a building full of paperwork? We landed at a civilian port on the western continent and traveled to the capital by ground transport. Dominguez had forged transfer orders that identified us as Administratum inspectors from the Segmentum headquarters, a story bland enough to be believable and important enough to grant us access to restricted areas. The sub-levels were another matter. There are 17 checkpoints between the public archives and the secure storage vaults, Dominguez said as we approached the sanctum's main entrance. Most can be bypassed with the proper documentation, which I have. 3 require biometric verification from personnel I've identified as susceptible to certain pressures. 1, the final checkpoint, is protected by systems I've never been able to circumvent. What kind of systems? The kind that require a key I don't have. He glanced at me. The kind that recognizes souls. The first 12 checkpoints passed without incident. Dominguez's paperwork was impeccable, and his identified personnel proved as susceptible as he'd promised, a combination of blackmail material and carefully applied bribes that made me wonder how long he'd been planning this operation. Checkpoint 13 was a biometric scanner, operated by a senior archivist named Hendricks. She was 58 years old, had served in the sanctum for 31 years, and had a gambling problem that Dominguez had been exploiting for the past 7 months. She waved us through without making eye contact. Checkpoint 14 required a psych evaluation that would have been impossible to fake, except that the administrator responsible for the evaluation was dead. He'd died 3 days earlier in a transit accident that, according to Dominguez, had been entirely coincidental. Coincidental, I repeated. I had nothing to do with it. The priest's expression remained perfectly neutral. Sometimes, the universe cooperates. Checkpoint 15 was empty. The guards who should have been stationed there had been reassigned to crowd control duties for a scheduled parade in the capital's central district. The parade, also coincidental. Dominguez smiled that unsettling smile. Though I may have submitted the parade permit 12 years ago, under a false name, with a date that happened to correspond with our arrival. 300 years of planning, 300 years of waiting, preparing, arranging contingencies for a moment that might never come. You really want to die, I said. I want to choose, he corrected. The same as you. Checkpoint 16 was the last standard barrier before the secure storage vaults. We passed through it on forged credentials and descended into the sub-levels proper. The vault was cold, not metaphorically. The temperature was maintained at 4 degrees above freezing to preserve the more delicate records. Our breath clouded in the dim light as we walked between rows of sealed containers, each one marked with alphanumeric codes that corresponded to subjects in the Administratum's secret archives. The keys are stored in section Omega-7, Dominguez said, consulting a data slate he'd produced from somewhere inside his robes. Individual containers, one for each confirmed subject. The containers are keyed to the subject's biosignature. Only the person whose soul was modified can open their own container. You said the final checkpoint requires something you don't have, the vault entrance. He stopped walking. Through there. I saw it then, a massive door, 10 meters tall and seemingly carved from a single piece of obsidian. No seams, no visible locks, no control panel, just smooth black stone marked with symbols that made my eyes ache. The same symbols from the chamber on Castellax Minor. The door recognizes souls, Dominguez said. Specifically, it recognizes souls that have been modified. Anyone else who touches it simply feels stone. But someone like us, someone the Administratum has claimed, we feel something different. What? A question. I approached the door. The cold intensified as I drew closer, seeping through my uniform, settling into my bones. The wound in my chest throbbed. I placed my hand against the obsidian. The universe shifted. Not physically, I was still standing in the vault, still breathing the frigid air, still feeling the stone beneath my palm. But something else had changed. Some fundamental quality of reality had tilted sideways, and for a moment, I saw the door as it truly was. Not stone, information. A barrier made of pure data, compressed into physical form through processes I couldn't begin to understand. The symbols weren't decorations, they were questions, encoded in a language that predated the Imperium itself. One question burned brighter than the others. Why do you serve? The answer rose from somewhere deep inside me. Not my conscious mind, something older, something that had been waiting for 17 years to be asked. I don't. The door opened. Section Omega-7 was smaller than I'd expected. A circular chamber perhaps 20 meters across, lined with alcoves containing brass cylinders identical to the one Dominguez had shown me on Castellax Minor. Each alcove was marked with a name: Elena Vance, Jacob Reese, the 17 others. And one more, freshly added, the designation still damp with some kind of sealant: Marcus Webb, Subject 94 Kappa 7. I walked to my alcove. The cylinder waited inside, covered in seals and sigils, pulsing with a faint warmth that seemed to respond to my presence. "This is it," I said. Dominguez stood beside me. His own alcove was at the far end of the chamber, the first one, judging by its position. The prototype's container. "You have a choice," he said. "Destroy the key and remain locked forever. Activate it and die. Or, take it with you, keep it close. Use the threat of activation as leverage." His dark eyes studied me. The Administratum doesn't want to lose its investments. If you make it clear that you'll release yourself rather than serve, they might negotiate, offer you something in exchange for continued compliance. What kind of something? Freedom from deployment, a position where your condition serves your interests rather than theirs. The same deal they've offered to others who learned the truth and chose to cooperate. Is that what you chose? I chose to destroy my key. He gestured at his scarred hands. And then I spent 3 centuries regretting it, trapped forever in a body that won't let me go, watching everyone I've ever cared about grow old and die, while I remain exactly the same. His voice hardened. I thought I wanted immortality. I was wrong. But by the time I understood, it was too late. I reached into the alcove and picked up the cylinder. It was lighter than it looked, warm against my palm. The seals tingled where they touched my skin. "You brought me here," I said. "You've been planning this for years. You want me to make the choice you can't." "Yes. You want me to prove that it's possible to fight back, to break the programming, to be something other than what they made us." "Yes. What if I make the wrong choice?" Dominguez smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuine. "Then I'll know that too, and I'll keep looking. There's always another candidate, another anomaly, someone else who might succeed where you failed." I looked at the cylinder in my hands. My release, my death, my freedom, 48 battles, 17 years, hundreds of wounds that should have been final. I'd carried the weight of all those escapes without knowing their cost, without understanding that each survival was another link in a chain I'd never consented to wear. The Administratum had made me a weapon, had used my inability to die as a tool for their eternal wars, and now they wanted me to choose between serving forever or dying in agony. I chose neither. I put the cylinder in my pocket and walked toward the door. "Webb?" Dominguez's voice was sharp with confusion. "What are you doing? Changing the terms?" I'd spent my entire military career following the mathematics of survival, counting battles, cataloging wounds, accepting whatever numbers the universe assigned to me. The Administratum had weaponized that compliance, turned my obedience into their profit. No more counting, no more mathematics, no more accepting the choices they gave me. I had the key now. I could destroy it, activate it, or keep it. But there was a fourth option, one that Dominguez hadn't mentioned, probably because it had never occurred to him. I could use it, not on myself, not yet. But the key was designed to release souls from their modifications, to undo the locks that kept people like me alive against their will. If I could understand how it worked, if I could replicate its function, I could free the others, all of them. The 17 confirmed subjects, and however many more were scattered across the galaxy, fighting the Imperium's wars, dying and dying and dying, and never being allowed to stop. I could give them the choice I'd never had. "You're insane," Dominguez said as I passed through the vault's entrance. "The Administratum will hunt you. The Inquisition will hunt you. Every system that benefits from your condition will mobilize to stop you. Probably," I kept walking, "you'll die. Eventually." I stopped at the corridor's entrance and looked back, but I'll die on my own terms, and before I do, I'm going to break as many of their chains as I can. Dominguez stared at me for a long moment, then slowly his expression shifted. The sadness remained, but something else joined it, something that looked almost like hope. "The registry on Castellax Minor," he said. "You destroyed part of it." "I did. There are other registries, 13 more scattered across the Imperium. If you could find them, destroy them all, the Administratum would lose track of us, lose their ability to monitor who we are and where we're deployed. That's why I destroyed the first one. I hadn't consciously planned it at the time. The action had been instinctive, a rebellion that predated my understanding of what I was rebelling against. But now it made sense, first the registries, then the keys, one by one, until there's nothing left for them to control. Dominguez reached into his robes and pulled out his data slate. "I have the locations, all 13. I've been collecting the information for centuries, hoping—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Give it to me." He handed over the slate. I tucked it into my uniform beside the cylinder. "What will you do?" I asked. "What I've always done." He smiled, that genuine smile again. "Wait, watch, hope," a pause. "And pray that you're better at this than I was." I left him standing in the cold of the vault, surrounded by brass cylinders and the echoes of 300 years of regret. The path back to the surface was shorter than the path down had been. I passed through checkpoints that had already been cleared, walked corridors that no longer seemed endless. The weight of accumulated deaths stirred inside me. 48 battles worth of wounds, pressing against the weakened barrier of my modifications, but it didn't control me anymore. The wound in my chest was still bleeding, slowly, steadily, human. I'd have to deal with that eventually, find a chirurgeon who wouldn't ask too many questions, give my body time to heal through natural processes instead of impossible intervention. But first I had work to do. The shuttle that had brought us to Thracian 4 was waiting at the port, its crew oblivious to the contraband I carried and the war I was about to start. Corporal Martinez met me at the landing ramp, her eyes asking questions her mouth didn't voice. "We're done here," I told her. "And the priest?" "He's staying." I climbed into the shuttle and started plotting our next course. "He's been waiting for 300 years. He can wait a little longer." Martinez followed me aboard. "Where are we going?" I checked Dominguez's data slate. 13 registries, 13 facilities where the Administratum kept track of its impossible soldiers, 13 targets that needed to burn. The nearest was on Praetor's Gate, a fortress world on the edge of the segmentum. Transit time, 18 days. Security rating, moderate. Estimated casualties for a successful infiltration, acceptable. I'd stopped counting battles, but I was about to start counting something else. "We're going to war," I said. Martinez didn't ask against whom. She'd seen enough of the galaxy to know that some wars didn't fit into simple categories. Imperial versus xenos, loyal versus traitor, living versus dead. This was a different kind of war, a war against mathematics, against compliance, against the systems that turned human beings into weapons and weapons into expendable resources. I pulled the cylinder from my pocket and set it on the console beside me. My death, waiting patiently for the moment I chose to claim it. 48 battles had taught me how to survive. The 49th would teach me how